During the Passover meal, it is the usual custom for the youngest son in the household to ask on Passover, what makes this night so special? Or why is this night different from all other nights? For us as Christians, we think that the Passover meal is a neat experience. But for those first Jews celebrating that Passover, it was not just a neat experience. It was an education and guarantee of freedom. It is a night when they got to eat fast food. For many of us, maybe eating fast food growing up was a special occasion. But now it's just as easy for us to go to the drive-thru at either the Golden Arches or Taco Bell or wherever, rather than fix our own meals. But for those Jews celebrating the first Passover, it was fast food, a meal that they had to eat on the run. And as they are eating, they are commemorating the climax of the plagues in Egypt and their own deliverance into freedom. Oddly, this freedom comes in the midst of death. We as Christians have almost a paradoxical relationship with death. Either death is an enemy whose destruction is already declared in the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, as Paul reminds and guarantees to the Corinthians, or death reminds us that we are baptized into the death of Jesus, and as we experience death like his in baptism, we are promised the hope of a resurrection like his, as Paul reminds the Romans. So as we consider this paradoxical relationship in at least two of Paul's more famous passages about death and resurrection, both to the churches at Corinth and Rome, we see that death can either be an enemy or a portal to life more abundant. Perhaps even there is no real paradox. The only way to describe death is an enemy. For sure, it is an enemy to us in this life, but it is also an enemy to those who are enemies of ours in this life. For those Israelites waiting news of what is going to happen to them in today's Exodus passage, they see that death that causes them harm also causes harm to the Egyptians. The angel of death is causing death to their enemies, the Egyptians, while these Israelites and Hebrews are being saved. Their salvation, though, is dependent on the death of innocent and perfect lambs. These lambs that their blood was shed so that it might be painted on the doorposts and lintels of the homes of these Israelites, so that the angel of death would spare them and not affect and inflict their firstborn, as was happening to the Egyptian families. As it was necessary for this death of these lambs, the Israelites were saved. So death is at once destruction, but it is bringing deliverance. It is at once enemy, and yet a portal to life and freedom. In order to receive this life, though, the Israelites had to follow God's teaching and instructions. God offered salvation, a means of saving the Israelites, but they had to be willing to respond to the offer. He gave them a way to salvation, but they had to follow his instructions. From choosing the lambs that were to be killed so that their blood may be shed, so that the blood may be painted on the doorposts and lintels, to the way that they ate their meal, and even about the clothing that they wore to be ready to leave at a moment's notice. God offers this life and salvation, a deliverance, but the Israelites had to be willing to accept the terms and conditions. God is choosing these Israelites in today's passage. And again, God chooses us. Think about what this means. Consider this, that we are so valuable to God that he chose us as one of the early picks and chose us with enthusiasm. God chose us much like in our growing up during gym class when we picked teams, and instead of being in the middle or towards the back end, God says, I want you first, and I want you and you and you. I want all of you on my team, and I want you with me forever. God does this even though through no ability or standing that we think that we have. God still chooses us, but we must be willing to follow his instructions, just as those Israelites in today's Exodus passage. We are essentially beggars depending on God's mercy. Beggars not for food and drink physically, but beggars for righteousness and mercy of God. And although we may feel like we have no standing before God, he allows us, even as beggars, to choose him because he has chosen us. And so I pray that we would choose him with the same enthusiasm that he has chosen us. When we make those decisions and follow his instructions just in the same way that he gave instructions to be followed by those Israelites in today's passage, we can find protection from death and evil. Amen.